Marco Davanti. I am the chair of the International Public Service, and in the name of my colleagues here at DePaul University and the School of Public Service, I welcome you all, particularly our panelists and speakers for tonight's discussion. These events of Global Cafe, they have the purpose of engaging more academics and community partners and leaders in various fields for the purpose really to understand better what are some of the issues in connection with global citizenship, but particularly within the topics that we all discuss in this School of Public Service that has to do with engagement across different sectors. That's why we also have a course that Professor Michael Diamond teaches along with Professor Rani Ramana, really to study these intersectorial partnerships. I myself have been involved with the past 10 years with UN conferences and activities. I always see recurring these themes of partnership, the multi-sector partnership, multi-stakeholder type of partnership, and so on and so forth. So we're really happy to welcome you all to this panel and discussion of today. I also would like to invite Chuck Tucker, who is the director of the World Engagement Institute, just to welcome at the name of the World Engagement Institute.
Well, welcome all. Welcome to Chicago. If you're not from around here, the weather's like this 24 hours a day. The weather's still good. The World Engagement Institute is proud to co-sponsor this series of events. Marco and Dr. Davanti has been instrumental in pushing this. Our institute does institutional capacity building projects around the world, education, training, and institutional capacity building. Heavy influence in the MENA region, Central Asia, and Latin and South America. So we're very happy to co-sponsor. We'd like to talk with all of you while we're here and we can see how we can partner in the future. We're all about engagement and partnership, working across boundaries in a multidisciplinary sort of way. So thank you for this, and I look forward to the conference.
So thank you all for coming out on this wonderful evening. I'm sure you've got a lot of other things that you might want to do. All of us are here because we recognize that the problems in the world cannot be solved by one sector alone. There's just simply aren't enough resources able to address all these kinds of issues and problems. So one of the solutions has always been to see if we can forge relationships and build cooperation between institutions, organizations in these three sectors and everywhere in the world. And it's fairly easy to talk about cooperation, and it's fairly very significant to talk about some of the results. But actually rolling up your sleeves and building cooperation between organizations, between sectors, is among the most difficult things that there is to do. And we are extremely fortunate to have today a group of panelists who have been spending their lives working at building partnerships. And we're very pleased that they're here tonight to share with us some really concrete examples of the power of collaboration and what can be achieved when we can forge these kinds of relationships. Now, all this came about a year ago when Susan Ross and I began to have some conversations. And by the way, let me shamelessly promote her book, Expanding the Pie, which is about fostering effective nonprofit and corporate partnerships. A lot of times we talk more about public-private partnerships, and we forget about the engagement with the civil society sector, which, as we all know, is a very important part of this. So Barnes & Noble has kindly agreed to sell these, and she has signed the copies, so you can please pick up one on the way out. Susan has spent her career working with CARE, USAID, many organizations in the different sectors, both developing and implementing programs, but also monitoring and evaluating them, and building these kinds of relationships. And she's seen what works, and so she's written about that, and she's very kindly agreed to moderate this session. This all grew out of our conversations. Just sort of running down the aisle here, Carol Pandek has been working at Rotary International. She's been there for now many years. She's directing their global program to eradicate polio. This is probably one of the most effective partnerships in the world. I like to call it is what the world can achieve when it decides to work together. And she's going to talk about some very serious challenges that are still remaining in eradicating polio. Casey Marsh is a fellow graduate from our program here at the School of Public Service. And she's down the director for the Midwest Regional Office of the U.S. Fund for UNICEF. And of course, UNICEF works in partnership with both corporate organizations and civil society organizations everywhere in the world. So they're one of the most effective groups that engage these kinds of resources. Suki McClatchy is the manager for global citizenship at Abbott Laboratories. And for those of you that are really interested in the role of corporations, we'll talk about Jeff in a second, but both Jeff and Suki have been instrumental, along with their colleagues, at encouraging Abbott to really play a very unusual role in working directly with their CEO and other key parts of the organization to make sure that not only do they make enough money for their shareholders, not only do they make enough money to invest in new product development, but they are engaged in the world, and they see that the problems that the world is challenged by has real impact if Abbott can share its resources in a way that strengthens societies and actually helps people build healthier lives. And so we'll talk about some other remarkable initiatives that Suki is involved with. Jeff has been working at this in many, many years as a professor. I think he taught at Indiana University as well, getting his master's in public administration and his law degree from Indiana University. He's done a lot of great work in AIDS communities, and when he came to Abbott, he was instrumental into helping them develop their global AIDS initiative, which has now morphed into many other programs as well. I'd like to say that one of Jeff's greatest contributions is sort of his philosophical approach to working with a large corporation, which is radical incrementalism. It's a phrase that I keep very deep in my heart. Jeff is now morphed over into the AbbVie, and he's the vice president for their AbbVie fund. And we're really delighted that just came back from Africa. I'm really delighted that we can get the time to us. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Susan Ross. And we're all set here. And you hit the lights. Oh, let me also make special thanks to Katie Brown and Sarah Small. If you guys could just stand up for a second. They've done the yeoman work in helping to make all the things.
I'll run back and forth. So thanks so much for coming. I tell people that I really like to have discussions that talk about partnerships, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Because I tend to go to conferences and people used to talk about how these partnerships were so great and they were so easy, and I was like, I must be in the wrong place because the partnerships that I was in were not always working that way. So I think that there's some great things that can happen with partnerships, but I think number one, we don't have a very good language. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how I try to maybe have some definitions about the language that we're talking about, what we mean by partnerships. And then the other thing is that we didn't have a lot of tools. When I was at CARE, companies would come to us and we kind of have to run around and go, like, do we think Nike's a good company or not? And it's very emotion-based. And I thought, we didn't run our programs that way. We were very analytical. We collected data, we did baselines, we made decisions based on information that we collected. And I thought that we should be making decisions about corporations and other donors that we were going to work with that way as well. So the last chapter of the book is a decision tree to help managers really think through some key things about what they want to get out of partnerships. And then I'm going to throw in a few case studies, but I think most of the case studies will come from the other panelists. Briefly, I'm just going to put this up here because the gray areas in the middle is basically what we're trying to achieve. So trying to find a sweet spot between a nonprofit, a government, and a corporation. And there's a lot of stuff that we don't necessarily agree on, and we don't necessarily have to agree on. So the question is, how do you find the stuff that you do agree on? And then the whole beginning of the book is really looking at trends that are influencing these kinds of partnerships. I think if you look at the last 10 years, there were a lot of partnerships that were maybe small in size, people are piloting things, trying to figure things out. I think if you look at where people want to go with partnerships, people understand that they would rather have fewer partners, but have more substantial partnerships and kind of have more relationships than lots of just, say, sponsorship programs. All of these different trends are influencing the types of these partnerships, why these partnerships are happening, and I think you'll hear about different trends from different people on the panel. The other thing that I wanted people to be really clear on is that there's a lot of, so if we look at just corporate partners, there's a lot of different ways and a lot of different things that companies can contribute. So if we look at just strict philanthropy dollars, which means the dollars that corporations actually get to write taxes off of, it's about $380 million a year in the United States. Only 10% of that comes from corporate foundations. And so when I talk to a lot of nonprofits, they say, well, we have to work with corporations because they have so much money. Well, it's true they have a lot of money, but it doesn't necessarily mean that all that money is coming out of their foundation. So what you need to start understanding is how you engage with a corporation. So for example, Jeff does a lot of work on HIV. If I wanted to talk to a company about doing HIV for their employees, I wouldn't go to the foundation, I would go to the HR department, because HR is really responsible for the health of, or it might be another department. So if we go down here to the bottom, where we talk about corporate contributions, and this is actually an average, it varies by industry. So on average, out of everything that corporations contribute, 32% comes from its foundation. 13% of it comes from employee matching grants. So that means that if I'm an employee and I want to give money to a nonprofit, that usually goes through the HR department, and that doesn't go through the foundation. Then these are the numbers that are usually the biggest. So an average of 35% goes for community engagement. In the banking industry, that can also be considered the corporate reinvestment funding. And it can also be other types of funding that people get to the community. And then lastly is what we're talking about through business integration. So it could be a marketing budget, it could be the R&D budget. So when you're really thinking about who you want to partner with and what you want to do, you have to understand all these different dynamics. Whether you're going to a foundation, whether you're going to a corporation, you really have to do your homework to understand what people are thinking about. And then I think the other thing is you really have to understand what's driving the organization that you want to partner with. So this slide is a little old, but I think it's really good because what this says, so this is a study that was done in 21 countries. United States, Japan, Brazil, Argentina, Australia, Slovenia. And what it shows is that all of the customers basically want to have products that are made with good quality and low price. They want to have it be made in the way that the employees are being treated fairly. Now, there's a discussion about what does it mean to treat an employee in China fairly versus, for somebody in the United States per se. But the thing is, this is really what's driving companies to do a lot of what whether it's corporate social responsibility, whether it's shared value, these are the things that are really important to them. And so as nonprofits, if we can actually show that our programs can help them achieve these objectives, the more likely we're going to find those sweet spots. So before I get into the typology of partnerships, I actually found this, it was actually done by a couple of environmental people. But I like this methodology because it basically looks at 3 categories and looks at what makes partnerships successful. So first they talk about people. And the idea is that you need to have the right people at the table. And one of the examples is that in one of the case studies in Indonesia, they were trying to recycle plastic bottles. And there was a certain fee, and actually, just like in California, it's 5 cents for every can. If you bring it back, then you actually get the 5 cents. Well, what they found in Indonesia was that the rate that they gave for the recycling wasn't high enough for the average person. But it was high enough for people who are scavengers and garbage collectors. And so initially they had never identified them as one of their key stakeholders. But when they had to go back and redesign the project and they started looking at who are really our key stakeholders, they had to look outside the box. So for some organizations that might be trade unions. So the idea is that we're always used to like working with the people we always work with. And what this is really saying is you have to figure out how to work with the people that you don't know. And you have to figure out how to get to know the people you don't know. Goals obviously are fairly straightforward. The more complex the partnerships, the more structure and systems you have to be able to manage it. And then, okay, so this was written in 1995, so it's a capacity building. Now I'm sure we would say something like reflective learning and knowledge management. But what this really says, and this is the thing, invest in the relationship. And what I always tell people is, if you don't invest in the relationship early, you're going to spend a lot of time at the end trying to fix the relationship. So, a lot of times people want, the money right away, or they want, the partnership to happen right away, and particularly corporate people kind of get frustrated because they think we're going too slowly. But the thing is, especially when you're different, it's kind of like you could elope right away and go to Vegas and get married, but, there's a certain reason why people date. So I'll just leave it there, right? I'm not being judgmental. So what do we mean by partnership? Everybody talks about partnership, collaboration. Are they different? Alliances. So everybody throws around these terms, and when I started writing this book, I was like, I want a typology to understand what we mean by different levels of partnerships. And people said, oh, that's great, when you find it, let me know. And there were definitely things out there, but it wasn't very consolidated. So I kind of had to tweak things from different places. So just look on this side first. So the thing is, not everything you do is a partnership, right? So there's different ways that nonprofits engage with corporations to try to get them to change their behaviors, which are not partnerships. So that's what this is. This is basically saying, I'm not changing any money, I'm engaging with you, but I'm not partnering with you. We don't have the same shared vision. So for example, consulting. Let's say that you're extending an airport and you want to see what the environmental impact of that is. You might go to an environmental NGO that works in that area or with that community and say, we want to hire you to do some research for us to help us understand what's going on. But it's kind of a one-time thing. So there's not a lot of engagement. There's some discussion, but it's not a big thing. My favorite, which hasn't really taken off, is that, and I say to people, so there's a group in Washington, D.C. called Interaction. It has 200 nonprofits in it. So let's imagine that all the NGOs in Interaction decided that they were only going to buy Dell computers because they had the best environmental record. And they told people that they were going to buy Dell because they had the best environmental record. Don't you think that HP would be having some discussion about, well, like what's so good about theirs? So there's a lot of power in consumerism. And if you look at all the boycotts against Nike during the sweatshop days, shareholder resolutions, I'm not going to go into that much. And then most people know that what they think of NGOs is chaining themselves to trees and boycotting, and So all these ways are ways that we engage with corporations, but we don't partner with them. So if we go over on this side, so these are actually partnerships, but there's different levels of effort. So it's kind of like dating. So I could go out with a date with someone, right? And James Austin used to call this the charity and gratefulness syndrome. So, you go out on the first date, and, the guy pays, which is kind of like the corporation gives me some money for a sponsorship. And the woman is thinking, oh, this is really nice, but are they going to call me again? Like, what are their expectations? So you can have a one-off kind of relationship, right? You go out, you have an event that's sponsored by a company or by a government agency, and that's all pretty much it is. There's not a lot of level of effort required, right? Transactional, what I like to describe it is, it's kind of like contract dating. So, you have to go to that wedding and you really don't want to go by yourself. So, it's like if you're a nonprofit, think about doing an audit. You don't really want to do it, but, you have to have a contract with somebody to actually come in and do this audit. You have very specific terms of reference, and they come in, they do it, and then they leave, right? So these are the most interesting. So joint programming is kind of like dating. Joint programming is really like, I have these skills, and you have these skills, and we're going to come together, and we're going to create something new. Something that we couldn't do otherwise. And so we have this shared objective or shared vision that we're trying to reach. And I'll give you a couple examples of this after I explain this. And so joint programming is, it's even different than being a donor and a donee. Because usually when you have a donor-donee relationship, the donor decides what's going to happen, and the donee maybe has some comments, but they pretty much do what the donor says. This is very much everybody coming together at the table, and people have different core competencies. So, what a company can do and what an NGO can do are different, and by bringing them together, you can actually create something that's more beneficial. And then integrated programming, these are basically like joint ventures. And there's not a lot of them. I'm going to go to this next slide and I'll just show. So City Year is now is a national NGO that actually started as a local Boston NGO working with low-income youth. And they started working with Timberland. The first date was that Timberland donated 50 pairs of boots. These are basically, it's a lot like AmeriCorps, so these volunteers teach for a year, go out and work in the schools. And so they started by donating boots. Then Timberland said, well, maybe we could give you some employee volunteers. Then a couple years later, they said, well, we'll provide the whole uniform for all these volunteers. And this is all in Boston. I mean, they weren't anywhere else. A couple years later, this Timberland CEO was put on the City Year board. They said, what we really want to do is we want to scale nationally. And so they gave them some money. I think they gave them $200,000. But what they said was, we have these stores in these cities. And so we could help you scale nationally. And so this started in 1991. Today, City Year is physically housed in Timberland's headquarters. And you can imagine if they tried to get divorced, because the Timberland people are still on the City Year's board. City Year is on Timberland's board. City Year is now a national organization. And so this is kind of what I'm saying is that you can have these life cycles of where you start with something that's just a philanthropic gift or something very simple, and then over time, you kind of build the missions with each organization. Does that make sense? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about tools. So one of the things that I find, and I found this when I was at CARE, is that nobody has any idea how many partnerships they have. And they can't classify any of them. And because of that, they have no idea how to staff what they actually have. And for big organizations like CARE, you have 2 people in Boston doing this, and a couple people in Chicago doing that, and somebody in Bangladesh, and nobody's talking to anybody. So you can do this for any kind of partnership, or you can do it just for private sector. But what I find is that, so the idea is, this is kind of level of effort. This is the least level of effort to the most level of effort. And, when I go into these organizations, they say to me, oh, we have 15 strategic alliances. And I'm like, you can't, because if it's really a strategic alliance where you have CEO and CEO involvement, or senior vice president involvement, you can't manage it. Even that organization as big as CARE can't manage it. So it all kind of starts this way. I make people have cards and they plot where they think they should go, and they're all over here because they think this is makes them look good. But after I kind of say to them, but what's your criteria? And who is actually managing this and what are you actually doing? It looks like something like this. So then what happens is you can start having a discussion of, well, if this is what it looks like, is this what I want it to stay like? If I really want to do more strategic alliances, maybe some of these I need to let die or reorganize them. And what kind of staff do I need? What kind of core competencies do I need for partnerships to be able to manage these different kinds of organizations? And then lastly, one of the things that I really tried to do was think about, so when we talk about partnership, what is it that we really want? And if we think about the two things that we really want, first of all, if